Clara Evans never planned to become the center of attention in her quiet Midwestern town. She lived a simple life in a small farmhouse on the edge of a sleepy railway line that hadn't seen a train in decades. She had been a schoolteacher for more than 30 years, the kind who still wrote lessons on the chalkboard and kept a jar of peppermints on her desk. When she retired, she filled her days with gardening, reading old journals and taking long walks near the rusting tracks that once carried people to new beginnings. One chilly afternoon in late autumn, while flipping through the local classifieds, Clara saw something unusual. It was a small listing, almost hidden between ads for used tractors and old farm tools. It read, 1930s passenger train car for sale, $500, needs repair. Buyer must transport. She blinked twice and read it again. A train car for sale? It sounded impossible. Her curiosity wouldn't let her rest. The next morning, she called the number in the ad. A gruff man answered. His name was Walter, the owner of a scrapyard outside of town. He told her the train car had been sitting there for years, left behind when an old rail company shut down. It was too large and too damaged for most buyers to bother with. But for some reason, Clara felt a pull in her heart. She asked if she could come and see it. The sky was gray when she drove out to the yard in her dusty blue pickup. The place was cluttered with broken tractors, twisted metal, and rows of forgotten machines. In the back corner stood the train car, long, rusted, and silent, its once proud green paint now faded into brown and orange streaks. The windows were shattered and ivy crawled along its sides. The metal door creaked loudly as Walter forced it open for her. Inside, the smell of age hit her, old dust, rain-soaked wood, and something faintly sweet, like memories that had never been aired out. Torn seats sat in uneven rows. The walls were covered in graffiti and rust, but beneath it all, she could still see the craftsmanship, the brass rails, the wood carvings, and the faint outline of numbers on the walls that told of another time. Clara stood in silence, running her fingers across the cracked window frame. She tried to imagine what it looked like in its glory days. Polished floors, passengers in fine coats, laughter echoing as the whistle blew. Walter watched her curiously and said, "Lady, this thing's been sitting here since before I was born. You don't want it. It's nothing but trouble." But Clara smiled softly. "Maybe, but it still has a story left in it," she said. Walter raised his eyebrows. "You're serious about buying it?" "I am," she replied, almost surprising herself. He shrugged. $500 and it's yours. But you'll have to find a way to move it." Clara didn't hesitate. She handed him the money she had been saving for a new porch roof. The moment she signed the paper, she felt a spark inside her, a purpose she hadn't felt in years. Moving the train car was no easy task. It took 3 days, 2 tow trucks, and a team of volunteers from the local yard. Most of the town thought she'd lost her mind. When they saw the rusty hulk sitting beside her farmhouse, neighbors whispered behind fences. One man joked at the grocery store, maybe she's building her own retirement home on wheels. Clara just smiled and kept working. She wore old overalls, gloves, and a hat to shield her from the sun as she scrubbed the metal sides day after day. The rust stained her hands, but she didn't care. She worked with patience, humming old songs she used to play for her students. Every day, she found little pieces of history, an old ticket stub wedged between the floorboards, a button with a railroad logo, a child's marble hidden beneath a seat. Each item made her more certain she was doing something important. She wrote about her discoveries in a small notebook every night. On one page, she scribbled, "This train carried people through the best and worst days of their lives. Maybe I can help it remember." Winter came early that year. The snow dusted the ground and covered the roof of the train like a white blanket. Still, Clara didn't stop. She placed a heater lamp inside and spent long evenings sanding wood and sealing cracks. Her old dog Max often sat near the door keeping her company. Some nights her hands ached so much she could barely hold a hammer. But she looked around the dim car, saw the faint reflection of brass shining through the rust, and felt warmth in her heart. One evening, her brother Paul drove over to check on her. He stepped into the train car, shaking his head. "Clara, you're wasting your time. This thing's falling apart. What are you even planning to do with it?" She looked up from her work, her face streaked with dust but her eyes bright. "I'm not sure yet," she said quietly, "but I know it still means something." He sighed, half smiling, half worried. "You always did chase impossible things." After he left, she sat on the old bench alone in the flickering light. The silence felt deep, almost alive. She closed her eyes and imagined the sound of the train when it was new, the whistle, the chatter, the clatter of wheels. For a moment, she could almost see the passengers again. A young soldier holding his sweetheart's hand, a mother comforting a crying child, a man staring out the window toward a future he couldn't yet see. The more she imagined their stories, the more determined she became. By late February, she began repairing the floor. She drove to nearby junkyards to find planks and panels that matched the original design. A retired carpenter from town, Mr. Lewis, noticed her effort and stopped by to offer help. "You remind me of my wife," he said with a gentle smile. "She used to fix old furniture like it was saving souls." Together, they worked through March, replacing panels and sanding frames. The smell of fresh wood filled the air again. The project slowly turned from an eyesore to something that caught the town's curiosity. Children on bicycles began stopping by to peek inside. A local baker brought her coffee and cookies every morning. One afternoon, the mayor himself came to see the progress. "I'll admit, Miss Evans," he said, "this is quite something. What exactly are you building?" Clara wiped her hands on her apron and smiled faintly. "Something that remembers," she said. He chuckled, not quite understanding. But the words stayed with him. As spring crept in, sunlight streamed through the repaired windows. The wood glowed warm and golden again. Clara hung small curtains she had sewn from leftover fabric. She placed a vase of wildflowers on one of the tables. Each day she sat for a moment to look at what she'd done, quietly amazed that something once so broken could start to feel alive again. One evening, as she was cleaning near the corner seat, she found a faded envelope tucked deep between the boards. It was brittle with age, sealed but never sent. The name on it was smudged, but she could make out the date, 1944. She opened it gently, and inside was a letter written by a young soldier to his mother. His words were simple and pure. He thanked her for her prayers, promised to come home soon, and told her that the train had given him hope on the way to war. Clara pressed the letter to her heart and whispered, "You did come home, at least your words did, that night." She sat at her kitchen table with the letter beside her teacup. The lamplight flickered softly as she began writing again in her journal. "This isn't just a train. It's a memory vessel. Maybe I can fill it with stories of all who once passed through." She decided then what she would do. She would turn the train car into a living memorial, a place where people could remember, reflect, and share their own family stories. But for now, there was still so much to do. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The floorboards creaked like whispers, and she still needed to restore the old brass lamps. Still, every challenge felt worth it. She had found something that gave her life new meaning. When she looked at the train from her porch glowing softly under the moonlight, it didn't look broken anymore. It looked like it was waiting for the next chapter of its story to be written. And in that moment, Clara realized something important. She wasn't just restoring a train car. She was rebuilding a piece of herself, the part that had been quietly rusting away since the day she retired. For the first time in years, she felt alive, connected, and deeply grateful. She whispered to the night air, "We'll finish this together." Spring sunlight touched the roof of the old train car like a gentle blessing. Months of hard work had turned the rusty shell into something almost magical. The once broken windows now sparkled. The floors shone with polished wood, and the faint scent of varnish mixed with wildflowers drifted through the air. Clara Evans stood by the open doorway, wiping her hands on her apron as she looked around with tired but proud eyes. She had spent nearly half a year pouring her heart into this project. Every nail, every board, every coat of paint carried a piece of her soul. Sometimes she still couldn't believe it had started with a $500 wreck that everyone said was worthless. Now it was more than a train car. It was a time capsule, a bridge between the past and the present. But the final step was yet to come. Clara wanted the town to see what she had done, not because she sought praise, but because she wanted the train's story to belong to everyone. She spent the next few days preparing for what she called the open car day. She wrote invitations on cream-colored paper and hand-delivered them around town. She invited the school children, the mayor, the local veterans group, the librarian, and even Walter, the scrapyard owner who sold her the car in the first place. Most people smiled politely but didn't seem to understand what they were being invited to. They expected maybe a quirky art show or a hobby project. Still, by the end of the week, word had spread and people grew curious. The story of the teacher with the train had become part of town gossip. and now everyone wanted to see what she had done with it. On the morning of the event, Clara woke before sunrise. The sky was still painted in pale orange and pink as she brewed coffee and fed her old dog Max. She wore a simple blue dress, the same one she used to wear on the first day of school every year. To her, this day felt just as important. Outside, she tied a little ribbon across the door of the train car, not as a grand gesture but as a symbol of completion. The grass around it was trimmed, wildflowers lined the walkway, and a small wooden sign stood near the entrance. It read, "Memories on the Rails." By 10 o'clock, cars began pulling into her driveway. Neighbors came with their children, old classmates, and even strangers from nearby towns. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine respect for Clara's stubborn spirit. The first to arrive was Mr. Lewis, the retired carpenter who had helped her rebuild the floor. He brought his wife, who carried a bouquet of daffodils. "You did it, Clara," he said softly. "You really did it?" Clara smiled, but her heart was racing. "Come in," she said, "and bring the others too." When she cut the ribbon and opened the door, the sunlight poured inside like a spotlight. People gasped as they stepped in. The interior looked nothing like the rusted wreck it once was. The benches had been restored with smooth oak and soft cushions. The brass rails gleamed like gold. Gentle light bulbs hung from the ceiling, shaped to resemble the lamps of the 1930s. Every seat, every wall, told a story. Photographs lined the corridor, old black and white images of townsfolk who once traveled through the region. Clara had spent weeks visiting families, scanning their ancestral photos and collecting small stories about each one. Beside every picture was a little plaque with a short description. "This was James Porter," one sign read. "He left for the army from this very line in 1943. He returned home in 1945 and opened the town bakery." Another photo showed a young woman holding a baby. "Margaret Ellis," the plaque said. "She took the train every week to work as a nurse in the next city. She never missed a single day, rain or shine." As people walked further inside, the atmosphere grew heavy with emotion. Some smiled in nostalgia, others wiped away tears. Clara stood quietly at the back, her hands clasped in front of her, watching the faces of her neighbors transform from curiosity to awe. In one corner of the car, she had created a small memorial wall. It was dedicated to the town's veterans, men and women who had served and traveled through that same line decades ago. The centerpiece was a glass frame containing the letter she had found between the floorboards, written by the young soldier in 1944. Beneath it, she had engraved a single line on a brass plate. "He never made it home, but his words did." When an elderly man named Harold approached the letter, his hands trembled. He turned to Clara, his voice breaking. "That's my brother's handwriting. My mother used to wait for him every day at the station. We thought the letter was lost." Clara's eyes softened. "Then it's home now," she said quietly. Harold couldn't speak. He simply nodded, tears filling his eyes as he gently touched the glass. The whole crowd stood silent for a moment. Even children who moments before had been whispering and giggling fell still. Further down the car, Clara had placed a display of small objects she had found during restoration. The ticket stub, the marble, the button, and a few coins. She labeled them simply, "Found Pieces of Life." People leaned close to look at them, realizing that these ordinary items had once belonged to real people who laughed, dreamed, and loved. Near the back, a table held a guest book titled "Your Story." Clara encouraged everyone to write something, perhaps a memory of travel, a family story, or a message to someone they missed. By noon, the pages were already filling with neat handwriting, shaky cursive, and little doodles drawn by children. "This place feels like it's breathing," someone said softly, "like the train's alive again." Outside, the warm breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and people gathered in small groups talking about old times. Walter, the scrapyard owner, stood apart for a while, his hands in his pockets. Finally, he walked over to Clara. "You know," he said with a chuckle, "when you bought that thing, I thought you'd lost your mind. But seeing it now, I guess I was wrong." Clara smiled. "You gave me the start I needed." He nodded slowly. "You gave it a second life. And maybe you gave the town one too." Reporters from a local newspaper arrived that afternoon. They interviewed Clara under the shade of an old oak tree. When they asked her what inspired her, she looked toward the train and said, "I just didn't want to see another piece of history rot away." It carried so many people through moments that shaped their lives. I only helped it remember. Her words touched everyone who read the article later. Within days, photos of the restored train spread across social media. Visitors began driving from nearby towns to see it. Some came to look. Others came to feel something they couldn't quite explain. 1 week later, a school bus arrived carrying a group of students. Clara welcomed them with a smile. She guided them through the car, telling stories of how people once depended on the rails to reach their dreams. The children listened, wide-eyed and quiet. When they left, their teacher thanked her. "You've turned history into something they can touch," she said. As weeks passed, Clara began receiving letters from strangers. Some shared their own railway memories. Others sent old photos to add to the collection. Her small project had become something much larger, a living archive of connection and kindness. Then one afternoon, Clara received an unexpected envelope. It was from a television channel that produced documentaries about restoration and community stories. They had heard about her project and wanted to film a short feature about it. Clara hesitated at first. She didn't want fame, but she realized it could help preserve the train story for even more people. The filming took place on a bright summer morning. The crew captured every detail. The sunlight glinting off the brass rails, the photographs, the quiet moments of visitors standing in reflection. Clara spoke simply on camera, saying, "I think things, like people, are never too broken to be beautiful again." When the episode aired, people across the state were moved. Letters poured in, some from families who discovered connections to the same railway line. One man even visited to show Clara a picture of his grandmother boarding the train in 1932, the same car she had restored. They stood together inside, both smiling through tears. As the seasons changed, the train became more than a local attraction. It became a place of comfort. Veterans gathered there on Memorial Day. Couples renewed vows beside its glowing windows. Children held history projects inside, sitting on the same seats that once carried passengers through the Great Depression and wartime. Clara often sat quietly at the far end, watching. Sometimes she didn't say a word. She just listened, to the laughter, the whispers, the stories being shared. It was as if the train had found its voice again, speaking through the people who loved it. One autumn evening, just as golden leaves drifted across the tracks, Clara hosted one last gathering before winter. Dozens of people came, bringing candles and flowers. As the sun set, she thanked them for believing in her dream. "I thought I was saving a train," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But really, it saved me. It reminded me that life still has meaning after endings, that memories can keep us warm." Everyone clapped, but it wasn't loud or showy. It was gentle, respectful, filled with affection. Someone began to hum an old tune, and soon others joined in. The sound of voices and laughter filled the car once more, just as it had long ago. When the night ended and the guests left, Clara lingered alone inside. The lights were dim, the air calm. She ran her fingers along the wooden seats and whispered, "We did it." Outside, the moon rose high, silver light glinting on the brass rails. The train stood silent and strong, no longer forgotten, no longer broken. It had become a